Apologize in advance if this video is gonna look a little dark, if the light in this video is gonna be a little weird, but I'm filming from my hotel room and the light condition is not great here. I'm traveling these days, I'm at a conference, I'm playing games in the evening, just because when I'm traveling I have more free time in the evening than otherwise, and if I don't film a review now, if I wait until I'm home, well then the semester will start, the daughters will require my attention, and I do not know when I will have the time to film this. So I apologize for the visual problems here, but better this, I believe, that a long delay. In any case, a game that I've been playing in the evenings during my stay here, and also I've been playing it during the day when I have breaks from conference panels. This game is Pax Baltica, the game that depicts the Great Northern War that lasted from 1700 to 1721. This is a game for two players. One player will take control of Sweden, that here is represented by light blue territories and light blue blocks. So this is a block game. And Sweden may also have minor allies, such as the Ottoman Empire, with yellow blocks that start from there. There is a Ukrainian bloc that also may join Sweden, and a British fleet bloc that again may side with Sweden. The other player will control the coalition of enemies that go against Sweden, and that is composed of Russia with green blocks, Saxony with grey blocks, trust me, there are grey blocks in there, Denmark, and also again some minor allies. The map is divided in countries, identified by different colors. Then it is divided in regions. Each region, as you can see, has a sort of a little house with a number printed in it. Those are the garrisons. The player that controls the garrison in an area also controls the area itself. If there are no markers on a garrison, that means that the garrison is loyal to the country in which the garrison and the area are located. So, for example, these garrisons here and these areas are loyal to Poland. If an opponent takes control of a garrison, and that can be done only through a siege, then the opponent places a cube of his own color in that area on the garrison, and now the garrison and the area are loyal to the player that has a cube there. Also, you can see numbers in each area. Those are forage points, pretty much supply points. That number indicates the amount of supply points that the region can provide to the blocks that are there. Blocks that are in excess of that number, of course, will have to take hits and to suffer penalties during the supply phase. At the beginning of each turn, first thing, the players will have to roll to see if their allies join the fight. This scenario instructions will tell you which nationalities are in play at the beginning of the scenario that you chose. Sweden is always in play, but not all allies of Sweden may be in play, and not all countries and minor allies of the coalition may be in play. You roll a die for each potential ally that is allowed to enter the game. If you roll a 6, that country becomes active. You can add blocks to the board, you can start building blocks, and simply you can start using that nationality. Usually you need a 6 to activate an ally, but there are conditions on the board that may modify that. For example, if Sweden has blocks in Russia, then everybody else freaks out, and it is much more likely that other countries will join the coalition against Sweden. And there are also situations when certain conditions are met, and then certain nationalities will join the fight automatically. But this is the general idea that not everybody's in play at the beginning of the game, and you do not know exactly when certain countries will join the fight. Next, you use your replacement points to build blocks that are in your replacement pool, and to reintegrate steps the blocks on the board may have lost in previous battles or because of lack of supplies. Here you see on this track here the number of replacement points that the major nationalities in play have when they first entered the game. When you take control of areas that belong to the opponent, you reduce the number of replacement points that they have. For each areas that you steal from your opponent, the opponent will lose 4 replacement points. You do not gain points yourself, you simply deprive your opponent of those points. And weakening your opponents through control of enemy lands is extremely important, especially for countries that have a limited economy, such as Saxony and Denmark, because that is an incredibly effective way of, well, making your opponent much less dangerous than the opponent would be otherwise. Also, control of lands is extremely important for replacement purposes, because in order to be able to assign replacement points to your blocks on the board, the blocks need to be in your country, in areas that are friendly to you, or to be able to trace a line of communication to areas that belong to your nationality. That means that you can easily advance through enemy lands, ignoring all the garrisons, but then you will find yourself stuck in enemy territory. You will not be able to retreat in battle, because you can only retreat in friendly territories, and after you take damage in battle, you will not be able to assign replacement points to your weakened units, which can be, trust me, pretty bad. It is something that you probably will want to avoid. Next, each player rolls 1d6 and matches the result with this table here, and that will determine the number of actions that the players receive for that turn. That means that you have a limited amount of actions. You do not know how many actions you're going to have next turn. You will never be able to use all of your blocks each turn, and therefore you will have to prioritize to choose among your blocks which are the ones that is more profitable to use now, which are the fronts that you should activate. Very tough decisions will come from here, and those are decisions that you will have to make from turn to turn. It may also be that you roll a 6, then you do not get actions at all. You roll on an event table, and you simply will see what the result is. Events may generate positive effects for you, negative effects. It is unpredictable, and on top of that, the event table will add historical flavor and theme to the experience. For each action that you have, you may perform a recon action. That is, you may look at the blocks of the opponent in a single area adjacent to an area that contains blocks that you control. This is a block game, so usually the blocks will be facing the owner, and you know where the blocks of the opponent are, but you do not know which unit they represent unless you fight them or unless you use recon. You may use an action to activate a single area on the board, and then you can move any and all of the blocks in that area. Blocks activated for movement can move up to their movement allowance. They have to stop moving when they enter an area containing enemy blocks. But if they end movement in an area that has no enemy blocks but has an enemy garrison, then they can attack the garrison for free. They can just launch a siege at the end of their movement. If that is not successful, then your blocks will be sitting there in a foreign land surrounding an enemy garrison, and then next turn you can spend an action to use a siege declaration. That means that you can use your blocks that haven't moved in an area to attack the garrison of that area. You can use an action to roll on the national politics table. Unpredictable effects. Many of them are good for you, not all, so there is a little bit of chance here. You're taking a chance. Replacements, you can spend an action to receive a replacement point to add a single step to one of your units on the board. That is an extremely inefficient way of receiving replacements. You probably will not want to use that action unless you're really, really desperate. After all movement is completed, you will resolve battles in each territory that contains blocks belonging to both players, like in this case here. If you ever played a block game by Columbia Games, then you know how this works. Blocks have an initiative rating expressed with a letter A, B, and C. Blocks with an A attack before B blocks, and B blocks before C blocks. And when there's a tie, for example, both players have an A block or a B block, then the blocks of the defender attack first. So all the B's of the defender before all the B's of the attacker, and so on and so forth. When you're attacking, you roll a number of dice equal to the number of steps that the block has, and you score a hit for each number that you roll, which is equal to or less than your number to hit, which is the one printed by your initiative letter. Each hit reduces an opponent by 1 step. Back to a full view of the map in pretty poor light conditions, but I need to share the full map to draw my conclusions. Well, conclusions. This is a pretty fascinating game, a game that I must confess took me a while to warm up to. Because on one hand, the Columbia block system is something I've seen so many times in so many other games, and this game didn't really seem to be doing anything innovative with it, which is true, it doesn't, but it does interesting things around it. So actually knowing that system already gave me more opportunities, more mental energy to concentrate on other aspects of the design. And in fact, there are quite a few specific rules that apply to each country, to when the country becomes active, how the country behaves. Each country really has a lot of unique features. For example, there is a Swedish attrition track that indicates specific penalties when Swedish blocks are eliminated. Blocks of certain nationalities will only be able to act in some areas of the map, some can only defend. Just a lot of special things. The Ottomans have special rules that may kick them out of the game not long after they join the fight. So, to get used to that took me a while. I really had to peruse the player rates a lot at the beginning of my experience. When things started moving faster because I became familiar with all of the rules and exceptions, actually the game is pretty fast-paced. It is fast-paced because each turn you only have 1, 2, or 3 actions, sometimes no action at all because you roll for an event. And that means that, you have to concentrate on specific goals, and you move a certain number of blocks, maybe blocks in an area, blocking 2 areas, resolve battles, that's it, turn is over. Even though, and this is the peculiar thing, it is fast-paced but also slow-moving, because you cannot just rush to the land to attack the capital of the opponent, because if you do not take control of the garrisons of the opponent one by one as you proceed, the problem is that then you find yourself stuck in enemy territory, and that can be extremely dangerous. Other specific aspects of the design. The amount of replacement points that you receive at the beginning of the game when each player controls all of their lands is considerable. Sometimes you have the impression that battles can be a little ineffective because you inflict some damage on the opponent and then the opponent recovers, you inflict some more damage, the opponent recovers again, you recover too. But there is a tipping point, there is a moment in which one of the two sides start being unable to recover entirely, and that is when you gain advantage. When you start reducing the replacement points of the opponent, then battles become more decisive, and the idea of destroying enemy blocks, even though those blocks can then be rebuilt thanks to replacement points, is that those blocks have to be rebuilt in specific areas. For example, Russian blocks that maybe were fighting here will return when rebuilt here, which is not a big disadvantage, but for Saxon it is quite more considerable, because blocks that are destroyed, say here, still have to be rebuilt in the original area of Saxony, and then it takes them a while to go back, say, there, if that is an area of interest. Being destroyed and rebuilt can be tragic for Sweden, because Swedish blocks come back from Sweden proper, which is here, it is surrounded by the sea, and then it takes time to move the blocks back to the continent. You need to use specific blocks, fleets, but it is a procedure that takes time, and that means that in the meanwhile, blocks that are left on the continent may find themselves at a disadvantage. So even if you're quote-unquote pushing blocks back rather than destroying them forever, that still has an effect, and that still allows you to get closer and closer to your objectives. What you're trying to do is to take control of lands of the opponent. Victory is determined at the end of the scenario mainly based on the number of replacement points that Sweden has. There are also other points gained in other ways, but this is the main idea. That means that Sweden is actually the defender here, which is something you will not see intuitively as you play the game, because Sweden needs to be on the attack, needs to keep pressure on the opponents. And to do that, Sweden is trying to force the opponents into signing a truce, which you do by meeting certain conditions, for example, by taking control of the tech capital area of the opponent, or by destroying all the blocks that the opponent has, or by destroying the king of the opponent. Each country has a block that represents the king. Because Sweden is the powerhouse here, I would say almost feels like the bully here. Individually, Sweden can take down each member of the coalition and beat them to a pulp. That's how excellent the Swedish blocks are and how powerful the replacements of the Swedish are. However, Sweden does not have an unlimited amount of blocks, cannot keep up a good fight on several fronts, and this is why the coalition needs to attack from several places at the same time and needs to keep pressure against Sweden. Pressure that Sweden is trying to prevent by knocking the opponents out of the war one after the other. What I like the most about this game, in fact, is the interaction, the very organic feel that you have from seeing all of these countries that are trying to achieve specific goals that all interact with one another. Sweden tries to take the opponents out of the fight, for example, by taking control of the enemy capitals, but that means that you're stretching in one direction. Say Sweden is concentrating forces against Russia, then Sweden may be leaving its own capital underprotected or unprotected against Denmark. Denmark may launch a powerful attack against Sweden there, but then by doing that may leave its own capital unprotected from, say, an attack that may come from the sea. Saxony comes from here, and again may stretch and try to take control of that corridor there, because Saxony doesn't have fleets, so will act on the continent, and same idea as before. You stretch in this direction. What if then Sweden comes marching down here? It doesn't take that long. This area is not that far. Each country really has specific objectives, and the way in which the countries join the fight or knocked out of the fight may come back in the game later, and Sweden has to run back and forth and defend on all fronts and try to reduce the number of fronts. That is really what gives flavor and interest to the design to me. This is a game that, as I said, took me a while to warm up to, but now a game that I really like.